Kody sat on the edge of the motel bed long after Robyn's words had hung in the air like smoke. Unable to answer, unable to defend, because somewhere deep inside he knew she was right. That everything he had built, his marriages, his authority, his family dynasty, had been a performance of control more than a reality of love. And now the curtain had fallen in front of the entire world, leaving him naked and pitiful in the glow of headlines and flashing cameras. Robyn, meanwhile, stood over him with her arms crossed. Not triumphant exactly, but sharper, steadier, as if after years of drowning in his shadow, she had finally learned how to breathe underwater and could now watch him thrash without pity. Though beneath that coolness, her pulse raced with adrenaline, because leaking his secrets to the press had been a dangerous gamble, and she knew it. Knew there could be consequences beyond humiliation. Investigators digging deeper than she intended, allies turning into enemies, lawyers sharpening their knives. But she also knew there was no turning back, not anymore. And in that motel room where Kody's shoulders sagged and his breath came in ragged bursts, it dawned on her that for the first time in decades, she wasn't reacting to his power. She was dictating it, pulling strings he didn't even know were tied to his wrists. And yet the silence between them was so heavy it pressed against the walls until finally Kody looked up. His eyes red, his voice hoarse as he muttered that he couldn't survive this alone, that he needed her. That despite everything, she was still the only one who ever truly understood him. But Robyn only shook her head slowly, almost pitying, and whispered that understanding someone and saving them were not the same thing, that she was finished being his savior. And with that, she turned her back and left him there, hollowed out on a sagging mattress beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, the motel door clicking shut with a finality more brutal than any courtroom verdict. And when she stepped into the desert night, the air cool and sharp against her skin, she felt both a terrifying freedom and a gnawing emptiness. Because what came next was uncharted. There was no script, no plan, just the knowledge that she had set fire to the house they had all been trapped in, and now it was only a matter of watching who escaped and who burned. While back in the city, Meri stood at her own kitchen window watching news anchors debate whether Kody Brown would face charges, whether polygamy had masked something darker, and though she said nothing out loud, her reflection in the glass carried the faintest smile. Because Robyn had done what Meri herself had never needed to, cut Kody's legs out from under him without lifting a finger, though Meri also knew better than anyone that Robyn's victory would be temporary, that Robyn's rage had always been a wildfire without direction, destructive even to herself, and Meri, with her icy patience, would be waiting when the flames burned down to ash. But for now she let the reporters swarm. Let Kody squirm, let Robyn bask in her temporary crown, because the real game wasn't about exposure or scandal. It was about endurance. And Meri had always been the one who could outlast them all. Though across town in the cramped office of a local journalist who had broken the story, the phone rang with an unfamiliar number, and when the reporter answered, the voice on the other end was steady. Composed, unmistakably Meri's, offering not denial but direction, suggesting where else to dig, what other stones to turn, not to incriminate herself but to ensure Robyn stayed in the spotlight as the source, the instigator, the one whose fingerprints would be on the knife when the legal system finally came calling. Because Meri's brilliance was never in starting wars, but in making sure others were blamed for firing the first shot. And as Robyn celebrated her newfound agency in a dim motel room with the blinds half closed, she had no idea that the very attention she craved was also painting a target on her back. No idea that Meri was already planting stories that framed Robyn as unstable, as vindictive, as dangerous not only to Kody but to the family's fragile remnants. And Kody himself, drowning in shame and paranoia, began to believe those whispers too, because it was easier to see Robyn as a traitor than to face his own corruption. Easier to rage at her betrayal than admit that the accounts, the contracts, the schemes had all been real, all his, all undeniable, and in his desperation he called lawyer after lawyer, each one colder than the last, until finally one of them said the words he had feared most, that he might need to consider a plea if charges were filed, that public opinion was already poisoned, that Robyn's evidence, if legitimate, could bury him, and Kody, a man who had spent decades commanding households, found himself suddenly begging strangers for a lifeline. While Robyn, ever watching, ever waiting, told herself this was justice, this was balance at last, but in her quieter moments she wondered if she had destroyed not just him, but herself. Because the power she felt was fleeting, fragile, and already slipping the more Meri maneuvered unseen, and soon enough a new headline surfaced. Not about Kody's finances, but about Robyn herself. Anonymous sources describing her as erratic, unstable, possibly obsessed with vengeance, and though she screamed at the television that it was a smear, That Meri had planted it, she could feel the narrative shifting under her feet. And for the first time since the leak, she realized she was no longer controlling the story but trapped inside it. A character written by someone else's hand, yet even as panic fluttered in her chest, anger steadied her again because if Meri wanted war, Robyn would give her war, and the battlefield wouldn't be lawyers or journalists but hearts. Because she knew Kody's weakness had always been the women in his life. His need for validation, for worship, for someone to tell him he was still the center. And if Meri thought she could strip that from him, Robyn would remind him who had stayed the longest, who had bled the deepest, who had been his mirror when no one else dared look at him straight. And so she plotted her next move not in the language of law, but of intimacy, of secrets whispered in the dark. Because if she couldn't keep Kody's crown intact, she could at least ensure he never wore it for Meri again. And in that thought was a flicker of triumph, a reminder that wars are not always won in daylight but in shadows, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. And as the desert night stretched long and silent, the pieces on the board shifted again, setting the stage for betrayals not yet spoken, alliances not yet revealed, and a reckoning none of them could escape. The dust had barely settled outside the courthouse when the war shifted behind closed doors. No cameras, no microphones. Just the Browns, each carrying wounds too raw to hide. Kody paced like a caged animal, his voice sharp, slicing through the heavy silence. "You think you've won?" He spat, eyes darting between Christine, Janelle, and Meri. "You've destroyed this family. Everything we built gone because you couldn't stay loyal." Christine didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, steady, cutting through his rage like glass through silk. "We didn't destroy this family, Kody. You did, the moment you chose lies over love." Janelle leaned forward, her voice low but shaking with fury. "Don't put this on us. You drained accounts. You hid land deals. And you expect us to stay silent while you bury us under debt and shame? Not anymore." Meri's eyes welled, but her words carried a sharp edge Kody hadn't heard from her in years. "I wasted decades believing you cared. But all you cared about was control. And now you're watching it slip away." Robyn finally broke, her sobs echoing off the walls. "Stop it. Stop tearing him apart. We can fix this. We can still fix this if we stand together." Her voice cracked, desperate, clinging to a dream that was already dust. Christine turned to her, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Robyn, the truth doesn't need fixing. It needs facing. And you've been running from it for too long." The room fell into a tense silence. Kody's fists tightened, his face red with fury, but the weight of evidence crushed every excuse he tried to summon. For the first time, he looked small, diminished in the very family he once ruled. The attorneys re-entered, shuffling papers heavy with consequence. Depositions were being scheduled. Financial audits would begin. The next hearing was set. The Browns weren't heading toward resolution. They were heading toward war. Christine's parting words before leaving the room echoed like a prophecy. "This isn't the end, Kody. This is the beginning of your reckoning." And as the women walked out, one by one, leaving Kody and Robyn in the echo of their silence, the truth settled like a verdict that no gavel could erase. The battle lines were drawn. The family was no more. But the fight had just begun. The night after the courthouse showdown, the Brown homes felt colder than ever. Lights flickered on, but warmth was gone. What once was a shared family empire had splintered into rival camps, each side bracing for the next blow. Christine sat at her kitchen table, documents spread before her like battle plans. Bank records, property deeds, secret transfers, all the puzzle pieces Kody thought he'd hidden. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every year of silence, every night of being told her voice didn't matter. Meanwhile, Janelle's anger simmered into resolve. Phone calls to financial investigators, hushed conversations with attorneys, it was no longer about emotion. It was strategy. She had given Kody decades of loyalty. Now she would take back every ounce of what was hers. Meri's struggle was different. Torn between the fragments of love she once held for Kody and the betrayal burning in her chest, she stared at her reflection for hours. For the first time, she saw not a wife, not a sister wife, but a woman who could finally stand alone. And then there was Robyn, isolated, cornered. Her tears no longer drew sympathy. They only revealed fear. Late at night, she whispered to Kody in their empty living room, "They're going to destroy us." But Kody's silence said more than words. His empire was collapsing, and deep down he knew it. The next court session loomed, and whispers of new evidence spread like wildfire. Rumors of offshore accounts, Hidden deals with names no one recognized. The cracks weren't just showing anymore. They were splitting wide open. Christine prepared her witnesses. Janelle demanded transparency. Meri, silent but steady, vowed she would speak if the time came. And Kody? He rallied what little strength he had left, convinced he could still twist the narrative. But this time, the women weren't his wives. They were his opponents. The courthouse was about to see more than testimony. It was about to witness the collapse of a kingdom built on secrets. And when the gavel fell again, the Browns would never be the same. The second hearing arrived with an intensity no one was ready for. The courthouse, once a place of whispers and curiosity, now swarmed with reporters, cameras, and protesters holding signs. Justice for the wives. Truth will out. Inside, the Browns sat separated. No longer one family, but divided factions. Christine and Janelle on one side, Meri caught between, and Kody with Robyn clinging tightly to his arm on the other. The physical distance mirrored the emotional canyon between them. The judge entered, stern and deliberate. This wasn't going to be about feelings, it was about facts. And Christine came armed with more than anyone expected. Her lawyer rose first, dropping a thick binder on the desk with a heavy thud. Your Honor, what we present today are not allegations, but proof. Page after page revealed transactions funneled through shell accounts, property shifted quietly into new names, and cash withdrawals unaccounted for. Each revelation was a dagger slicing away Kody's defenses. Robyn's face paled. Kody's jaw clenched tighter with every document read aloud. But the courtroom wasn't done. Janelle took the stand. Her testimony wasn't fiery, it was calm, factual, devastating. She described the years of being dismissed, the money disappearing without explanation, the decisions made without their knowledge. Her voice cracked only once. We trusted him, and he betrayed all of us. Meri, long silent, finally spoke. She admitted her loyalty, her years of denial, and the pain of realizing the man she defended was never defending her. Her voice was raw but resolute. I stayed quiet to protect him. But silence is what allowed this to go on. I won't be silent anymore. The courtroom buzzed. Even the judge leaned forward, eyes fixed on Kody, whose usual bravado was collapsing into a mask of rage and fear. And then Christine dropped the final card, a recording. The audio crackled through the courtroom, Kody's own voice, angry, careless, boasting about how he moved money around so the wives wouldn't notice. Gasps filled the chamber. Robyn buried her face in her hands. Kody's face turned scarlet. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. Order! But order was gone. Because in that moment, everyone knew. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. This was an expose, a reckoning years in the making. And for Kody Brown, it wasn't just his finances on trial anymore. It was his legacy. Finances on trial anymore. It was his legacy. The recording hung in the air long after the last word faded. Kody's voice, angry, arrogant, undeniable, echoed in every corner of the courtroom. For years, the wives had been told they were overreacting, imagining things, twisting reality. But now reality spoke for itself in Kody's own tone. The power he had clung to like armor was stripped away in an instant. Robyn's sobs shattered the silence. He didn't mean it like that. He was angry, he was venting. She cried, her voice desperate, pleading. But no one was moved. The evidence didn't care about tears. Christine's lawyer pressed forward. Intent does not erase action, Your Honor. These are deliberate choices, not mistakes. This is deception. The judge's gaze settled on Kody, who sat rigid, fists clenched, breathing hard through flared nostrils. He wanted to explode, to shout down the accusations, but even he knew his words would only dig the hole deeper. Janelle leaned forward, speaking not to the judge but directly to Kody. We trusted you. You made us believe you were building a future for all of us, when really, you were just securing a future for yourself. Meri added softly, though her words stung sharper than any scream. I wasted half my life believing your lies. That ends today. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him. Every wall pressed closer, every eye locked on him, every truth stacking higher until it crushed the last fragments of his defense. The judge declared a recess. The gavel fell, but this time Kody didn't rise with swagger. He slumped, a man unraveling in front of the world. In the hallway, chaos erupted. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed like lightning, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Christine, what's your next move? Robyn, do you believe Kody's guilty? Meri, why now? Christine kept walking, head high, her silence louder than answers. Janelle shielded her face, unwilling to let the vultures feed on her pain. Meri, though trembling, met the cameras with a defiant stare, her silence a message in itself. But Robyn cracked. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she clung to Kody's arm. "He's innocent. He's a good man. You don't know him like we do," she sobbed, her words swallowed by the roar of reporters shouting questions she couldn't answer. Back in a private room, tempers exploded. Kody's voice roared, "You think you're heroes? You're liars, traitors. You wouldn't have a life without me." Christine's calm reply cut through him like steel. "We had lives before you, Kody, and we'll have lives after you. You're not our savior. You're our burden." Janelle slammed her hand against the table. "Stop pretending you're the victim. This is your mess, own it." For the first time, Kody's mask cracked. His shoulders sagged. His voice softened, almost pleading. "I was trying to protect us. To keep us safe." But Christine's eyes narrowed. "You weren't protecting us. You were protecting yourself. And you know it." Robyn collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. The man she had defended so fiercely was unraveling, and there was nothing left to cling to but the wreckage. When court resumed, anticipation hung heavy. The gallery, though hushed, buzzed with tension. Everyone knew the day wasn't over. The evidence so far had been damning, but whispers promised more. The next witness took the stand, an accountant who had managed some of the Browns' shared finances. With a steady voice, he confirmed what the women already suspected. Funds had been shifted, accounts hidden, taxes manipulated. Each word dug Kody deeper into a pit that no charm could rescue him from. Kody tried to object, his lawyer raising points, but the paper trail was undeniable. The accountant had the receipts, literal ones. Christine sat straighter with every document revealed. Janelle nodded along, her suspicions vindicated. Even Meri, still torn by the ghosts of loyalty, felt a weight lifting from her chest. Robyn, however, shook her head, whispering, No, it's not true," as though denial could erase ink on paper. The judge's patience thinned. "Mr. Brown, the evidence speaks louder than excuses. You will have your chance to respond. For now, sit down." And for perhaps the first time in his life, Kody Brown obeyed in silence. The silence in the courtroom after Meri's testimony was suffocating, and though the judge called for order, the room itself seemed to hold its breath as Kody shifted uneasily in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between the wives who once stood by him and now stood united against him. Christine leaned forward, her lawyer rising again with a thick folder clutched in hand, announcing that there was still more evidence to be reviewed, more truth to be revealed, and as she slid the papers across to the clerk, whispers spread through the gallery like wildfire. These were not just financial documents, but personal communications, emails, and handwritten notes that painted a picture of deliberate concealment, of Kody manipulating accounts and narratives to keep control, of a man who feared losing power more than losing love. Robyn trembled beside him, tears streaming as she whispered that it couldn't be true, that it had to be misinterpreted, but the screen lit up with projected messages. Kody's own words again, blunt, callous, dismissive, about how loyalty is leverage and how fear keeps order, and the wives who once clung to hope now stared at the undeniable proof that their lives had been orchestrated by a man who saw them not as partners, but as pawns. The judge's gavel slammed again, demanding calm, yet even he seemed shaken by the scale of what was unfolding, warning that fraud, coercion, and emotional abuse were not matters to be dismissed lightly, that the court would not hesitate to rule on custody, property, and even potential criminal charges if the evidence continued in this direction. And as reporters scribbled furiously, as cameras flashed in the corners despite the warnings, Kody finally snapped, slamming his fists on the table and shouting that everyone in the room was against him, that this was a witch hunt, that the women were ungrateful traitors who would be nothing without him. But his outburst only underscored what the evidence had already revealed, that his empire was built not on love, but on control. Christine sat taller, her calm presence commanding more weight than his fury. Janelle nodded firmly, finally vindicated. Meri's tears reflected not regret, but release. And Robyn, once his fiercest defender, collapsed into sobs so heavy that the bailiff had to offer her a tissue. The judge's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and unyielding, declaring that the proceedings would continue with even greater scrutiny, that Kody Brown's legacy was on trial as much as his actions. And as the courtroom doors closed for the day, the world outside braced for the fallout of secrets that could no longer be buried, the stage set for a reckoning that none of them could escape. For a moment, Robyn just stared. Christine, the one who had walked away first, the one who had mocked her devotion. Christine, who now lived her life free, unburdened, while Robyn clung to scraps. Robyn's thumb hovered over the screen before finally pressing accept. "Christine," she said, her voice hoarse but steadying. There was silence on the other end, then a cool voice. "I was wondering when you'd call." Robyn's jaw clenched. "You think this is funny?" "No," Christine replied, her tone sharp. "I think it's inevitable. Kody's mess always comes back around. You just thought you were immune." Robyn's hand trembled, but she tightened her grip on the phone. "I won't let her take everything. I won't let Meri rewrite history like she's the hero." Christine gave a low, bitter laugh. "History doesn't need her to rewrite it. You've been writing it yourself for years. And now the cracks are showing." Robyn's chest heaved, her fury boiling over. "You think you've won because you left, Christine? Because you ran?" "No, I stayed. I fought. I bled for him. That has to count for something." "Maybe it did," Christine said quietly. "But tell me this, Robyn. Did he ever bleed for you?" The line went dead. Robyn stared at the phone, her reflection trembling in the black screen. For the first time, the thought crept in, not of losing Kody to Meri, not of losing her position, but of losing herself. Her hands tightened on the wheel again, her breath slowing, steadying. If Kody wouldn't fight for her, she'd fight for herself. She would scorch the earth before she let Meri walk away with the crown. Robyn started the car, the engine growling back to life. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Robyn drove until the city lights blurred into the desert horizon. She pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel, the kind with flickering neon and curtains that never fully closed. She killed the engine and sat in silence, her chest heaving. The phone on the seat beside her lit up again, this time with a different name. Janelle. Robyn froze. Janelle never called her. Not since the fractures, not since the alliances had shifted. Slowly, almost suspiciously, Robyn swiped to answer. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice brittle. On the other end, Janelle's voice was measured, almost too calm. "To warn you." Robyn stiffened. "About what?" "You're losing control, Robyn. Everyone saw it in court. They saw you break." Robyn's grip tightened on the phone. "So you called just to gloat?" "No," Janelle said. "I called because Meri's not the only one with evidence. She's not the only one with history. You think you're fighting her? But what you're really doing is exposing Kody. And once he crumbles, you won't have anything left." Robyn's breath hitched. "Kody won't crumble. He has me." Janelle's chuckle was dry, humorless. "That's what Meri used to say." The line clicked dead again, leaving Robyn alone with the echo of her enemies' voices. Christine, Janelle, Meri. One by one, they circled like wolves, feeding on the cracks she'd worked so hard to hide. Her hands trembled as she reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder, documents she'd been saving for years, tucked away like insurance. Bank statements, contracts, emails, all of it tracing back to Kody. Every deal, every hidden dollar, every questionable move. If Meri wanted to prove her worth, Robyn could prove Kody's rot. Her reflection in the motel window stared back at her, pale and wild-eyed, but burning with resolve. "They think I'm afraid of losing him," she whispered to herself. "But they don't understand. If I can't keep Kody, I'll make sure no one else can either." She laid the papers out on the motel bed, her fingers smoothing each page like a general preparing maps before war. The next phase wouldn't be fought in the courtroom alone. It would be fought in headlines, in whispers, in betrayals. Robyn picked up her phone again and scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in years, a reporter's. Her finger hovered for only a moment before pressing call. When the voice answered on the other end, Robyn's lips curved into a sharp, trembling smile. "I think it's time the world knew who Kody Brown really is." 2 days later, the headline broke. Polygamy, profit, and betrayal. Inside Kody Brown's secret finances. By noon, the story was everywhere. Morning shows, gossip blogs, cable news tickers. Anchors leaned into their cameras, voices dripping with intrigue as they spelled out Robyn's dossier. Offshore accounts, misused funds, tax discrepancies, contracts signed in shadows. The family's name was no longer just a spectacle. It was a scandal. Kody sat at his kitchen table, the newspaper spread before him. His face was ashen, his hands shaking so violently the coffee in his mug rippled like water before an earthquake. This isn't true," he muttered, as though saying it aloud might bend reality. "It can't be true. Meri, standing by the counter, didn't answer right away. She watched him unravel, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Isn't it?" Kody's head snapped up, his eyes wild. "What are you saying?" Meri stepped closer, her tone measured but merciless. "I'm saying you've always played fast and loose, Kody. You wanted the power, the control, the image of the perfect patriarch. You think you can juggle wives and bank accounts the same way, careless, messy, hoping no one ever calls your bluff. But now someone has." Kody shoved the paper off the table, pages scattering. "This is Robyn. She's doing this." "She's trying to destroy me." Meri's voice sharpened. "No, she's trying to free herself. Destroying you is just collateral damage." His chest heaved. He slammed a fist into the table. "I can't lose everything, Meri. I can't." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "Maybe losing everything is the only way you'll finally see who you are." The room went silent, heavy with the weight of truth. Across town, Robyn sat in her motel room, watching the same broadcast on a tiny TV. Her hands were steady now, her breathing calm. For the first time in years, she felt power shifting, away from Kody, away from Meri, into her own hands. But power is a dangerous drug. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've started something you can't control." Robyn stared at the message, her pulse quickening. She typed back with trembling fingers, "Watch me." By evening, the parking lot of the courthouse swarmed with cameras. Reporters jostled, microphones outstretched, shouting Kody's name as he pushed through with his lawyer. Flashes lit up his pale face like a criminal perp walk. "Mr. Brown, did you hide money offshore? Are you being investigated for tax fraud? Did your wives know?" He barked back only once, "No comment," before ducking into the building. But the damage was already done. His image was shattered, his name a headline. That night, Kody tracked Robyn down. The motel door shook under his fist. "Robyn, open this door!" Inside, Robyn stood in front of the mirror, fixing her hair, her lips painted a shade darker than usual. She let him pound a few more times before calmly unlocking the latch. Kody stormed in, eyes bloodshot, his voice cracking with rage. "You did this! You fed them lies!" Robyn didn't flinch. She leaned against the dresser, arms folded. "They weren't lies, Kody, not a single word." "You're destroying me," he roared, pacing like a caged animal. "Do you know what you've done?" "The church is whispering. The state is sniffing around. I could go to prison." Her eyes glittered, sharp and merciless. "Good. Maybe prison is the only place you'll finally understand what it's like to live without power." He stopped cold, staring at her. "After everything I gave you. After everything you gave me scraps." She cut him off, her voice rising, raw. "I begged for your love, your loyalty, your truth, and all I got was your leftovers. You never chose me. You never chose anyone. You just played us all until there was nothing left to play." His chest heaved, his face crumbling. "I loved you, Robyn." She laughed, sharp and broken. "No, Kody, you loved that I loved you. There's a difference." The silence that followed was suffocating. Kody's rage faltered, leaving only desperation. He sank onto the edge of the bed, his hands shaking. "I can't survive this. Not without you." Robyn watched him, her heart hammering, her lips curling into the faintest, cruelest smile. "You'll have to try," she whispered. "Because this time, Kody, I'm not saving you." Now we've got Kody and Robyn's first face-to-face detonation post-scandal. His desperation, her power finally turned back on him. His desperation, her power finally turned back on him. By the time the final day of testimony arrived, the courthouse had transformed into a spectacle. Reporters camping on the steps, television trucks lining the street, commentators spinning theories of betrayal and redemption, and when Kody Brown walked in, his once commanding presence had shrunk into something brittle. His shoulders heavy, his eyes bloodshot, while Robyn clung to his arm but with a distance in her gaze that spoke louder than words. And across the aisle, Christine, Janelle, and Meri sat together for the first time in years. Not as rivals, but as survivors, united by truth. And as the judge called the session to order, Christine rose for the last time, her voice steady, her evidence already laid bare, but her closing words sharp as a blade, declaring that this was not about destroying a man, but about reclaiming lives stolen by lies, that for too long silence had been mistaken for consent, and loyalty had been weaponized as control. And as she spoke, the gallery leaned forward, captivated, the air electric with the sense that history was being written. And when Janelle followed, she added that families are built on trust, not fear, that leadership requires sacrifice, not dominance, and that Kody had twisted both into tools for his own power, her words slicing through years of gaslighting with the clarity of truth. And Meri, trembling but resolute, closed their united front by saying that even in her pain she chose forgiveness. Not for Kody, but for herself, because holding on to his shadow had cost her too much already. And she would not carry his weight another day. The judge, visibly moved though careful to remain composed, turned to Kody for his final defense, and the room froze as he stood, his hands shaking, his voice stripped of bravado, at first a whisper of denial, claims of misunderstanding, of being painted unfairly, but then rising into a desperate rant about betrayal, about faithless wives, about a legacy ruined, until even Robyn pulled slightly away from his side, her tear-streaked face reflecting not loyalty but exhaustion, the years of carrying his burdens finally pressing down too hard. And as his words spiraled, the judge's gavel thundered to cut him off, the declaration clear that this was not a pulpit for excuses but a courtroom of accountability. And in that moment, Kody Brown, once the patriarch who dictated every chapter of their story, stood small, cornered, and exposed, his empire of control dissolved before the eyes of the world. The ruling came swift and merciless, financial misconduct confirmed, assets divided, custody matters referred to further hearings, but the judgment that mattered most was unwritten, etched instead in the silence that followed, in the collective breath of liberation from three women who no longer carried his weight, in the quiet strength of voices once silenced now roaring in unison. And as the gavel fell for the final time, Christine, Janelle, and Meri walked out side by side into the blinding flash of cameras, their steps steady, their heads high, while Robyn lingered behind, torn between the man she had defended and the truth she could no longer deny. And Kody, left standing alone in the courtroom, his face pale, his eyes darting for control he no longer possessed, finally realized that the world he built on fear and manipulation had collapsed, not with the quiet retreat he once imagined, but with the deafening roar of justice and the undeniable weight of truth, a downfall as dramatic and public as the empire he once claimed would last forever. In the weeks after the verdict, the Browns' world fractured into headlines and whispers. Every magazine cover plastered with Kody's downcast face, every talk show dissecting the wives' testimonies, and while Kody retreated from the spotlight, refusing interviews, pacing alone in empty rooms where his voice once commanded obedience, Christine thrived in her newfound freedom, speaking boldly in documentaries and public forums about resilience and truth. Her story not one of scandal but survival, inspiring countless others who saw themselves in her pain, and Janelle focused on rebuilding stability, her children at her side. Her voice clear and pragmatic as she explained that healing required not erasing the past, but learning from it, a message that resonated far beyond the courtroom walls. And Meri, once the most silent of them all, stunned the world with a memoir that bared the raw reality of her years in shadows, her words not bitter but brimming with hard-won clarity, a reminder that silence can be broken and self-worth reclaimed. While Robyn lived in limbo, torn between the loyalty she had once worn like armor and the undeniable truth that had shattered her illusions, her appearances rare, her words halting, as if she were still piecing together her own identity from the wreckage of devotion. And Kody himself, once a man who strutted before cameras with smug certainty, now found himself pursued not by adoration but by creditors, lawyers, and the ghosts of his own arrogance. Each public outing marked by jeers, each attempt at control slipping through his fingers, and though he raged in private, blaming betrayal, blaming culture, blaming everyone but himself, the truth gnawed at him with every sleepless night, that his downfall was not crafted by enemies but carved by his own choices. And as time stretched on, the wives, once tethered to his orbit, built new worlds, new futures, their names now spoken not as extensions of Kody Brown, but as individuals who had faced fire and walked out stronger. And though the courtroom saga had ended with the gavel, its echoes reverberated across reality TV, across families in quiet living rooms, across anyone who had ever been silenced by control, leaving behind not just a collapsed empire, but a cautionary tale etched into the fabric of modern storytelling, proof that even the loudest patriarch can fall, and that sometimes the greatest power is not in holding on, but in finally letting go. The media circus only grew louder in the months that followed. Documentaries and podcasts dissecting every angle, with legal analysts debating whether criminal charges might still be filed, while tabloids speculated endlessly on Robyn's fate, some painting her as the last loyalist of a failed empire, others as a victim waking too late, and as Kody shrank from public view, sightings of him became rare and tinged with scandal. An angry confrontation at a gas station caught on cell phone footage, a bitter tirade in a grocery store parking lot, his voice once booming with confidence, now strained and ragged. A man clinging to scraps of control in a world that had moved on, while Christine's star only rose higher. Her interviews carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced down manipulation and emerged unbroken. Her story resonating with women across the globe who saw her strength as a rallying cry. And Janelle launched a foundation supporting financial literacy for women in complex family structures, determined that no one else would fall prey to the kind of secrecy and deceit she had endured. While Meri, her memoir soaring on bestseller lists, spoke openly of healing, forgiveness, and rediscovering her own worth after decades of being silenced, her vulnerability turning into empowerment. And as the wives rebuilt, the children too began to speak, some defending their mother's courage, others wrestling with the disillusionment of watching their father fall from pedestal to pariah, their voices raw, conflicted, but undeniably shaping the narrative of generational change. And through it all, Robyn remained the enigma, glimpsed in paparazzi shots with tear-streaked cheeks, or silent walks through grocery store aisles, her silence fueling endless speculation about whether she would stand by Kody in ruin or finally break free. Yet even as whispers swirled, one truth cut through the noise. The myth of Kody Brown had collapsed, and with it, the illusion of an unshakable patriarch who once believed he was untouchable, now reduced to a symbol of warning. A cautionary tale broadcast not only across reality television, but across dinner tables and courtrooms everywhere. Proof that no empire built on fear and deceit can stand forever. And that when truth finally rises, it does so with a force that no man, no matter how controlling, can ever silence. And no matter how controlling can ever silence. As the dust settled and the cameras moved on to fresher scandals, the long tale of Kody Brown's downfall stretched across the lives of everyone connected to him, each branch of the family tree bending in new directions. Christine stepping fully into her independence with a new home, new ventures, and a growing platform as a motivational speaker. Her once meek demeanor transformed into a beacon of strength for audiences who saw her not just as a former wife, but as a woman who had broken free from decades of control, while Janelle carved her own steady path, opening financial workshops and quietly becoming a figure of wisdom. Her pragmatism and honesty winning her respect far beyond the reality TV audience. And Meri, once the most sidelined, became the most surprising. Her memoir spawning a docu-series that let her tell her story in her own words, unfiltered and unafraid. Her transformation from shadow to spotlight serving as a testament to resilience. While Robyn's story remained far murkier, her silence speaking volumes as she drifted into obscurity, sometimes seen alone, sometimes with Kody, her eyes carrying the weight of loyalty and regret in equal measure. And Kody himself became a ghost of his former self. The man who once strutted with cameras trailing him, now avoiding them like plague, retreating into smaller and smaller spaces, rumored failed business ventures, whispered about in online forums but absent from the world he once dominated. His empire dissolved, his name no longer spoken with authority, but with pity, scorn or disbelief, and as the children grew into adults, their narratives diverged, some standing publicly with their mothers, proud of the courage it took to break free, others wrestling with conflicted loyalties, torn between love for their father and recognition of his failures, their voices forming the next chapter of the Brown legacy, whether they wished it or not. And yet through it all, one theme remained constant. The truth had finally been spoken, the silence broken, and the myth shattered, leaving behind a fractured but freer family, a patriarch stripped of his crown, and a cultural touchstone reminding anyone who watched that even empires broadcast on television can collapse under the simple, undeniable weight of justice and truth. And so, as the years passed and the noise of headlines faded into history, what remained was not the image Kody Brown once fought so desperately to control, but the truth that outlived him, the story of women who rose from the shadows of fear to reclaim their voices, children who learned strength through honesty rather than silence, and a fractured family that, in breaking apart, found freedom. Kody, once the self-proclaimed patriarch of an empire, became instead a cautionary tale whispered in the corners of reality TV lore, a reminder that power built on control will always crumble, while Christine, Janelle, and Meri carried forward not as footnotes in his legacy, but as authors of their own, proving that the end of one man's dominance was not tragedy but transformation. And in the final reckoning, the true legacy of the Browns was not betrayal or scandal, but the undeniable truth that no matter how long it takes, justice has a way of striking back, and when it does, it leaves behind not silence, but freedom. Silence, but freedom.